and there's a block. No, there's another block. And I'm just bringing me down a notch, bringing me down a notch.
Welcome to Starspill USA, where we delve deep into the untold stories that challenge convention and reveal the hidden truths behind the public image. The story of Kody Brown begins not with the glitter of studio lights or the noise of fame, but in the austere, sun-scorched landscapes of Utah, where the earth itself seemed baked into shades of gold and rust by decades of relentless heat. Where the air was dry enough to crack lips and the horizon felt eternal. It was a land that had shaped generations of families who carried with them traditions as old as the settlements themselves, where faith and family were woven together in intricate patterns. And where for some communities, plural marriage was not a fringe curiosity, but a God-given covenant. Kody was born into this cultural tapestry, into a society where polygamy was not whispered about in shame, but spoken of in certain circles with the quiet conviction of divine purpose, a means to build a kingdom not of wealth, but of people, wives, children, grandchildren, eternal bonds stretching into the afterlife. From his youth, Kody absorbed this vision. Marriage was not merely about romance or personal fulfillment. It was about a higher calling, a structure that promised strength through numbers, unity through faith, and a chance to create a family that would endure beyond the confines of a single lifetime. He was not destined, in those early years, for the neatness of suburban life with a single front door and a pair of children playing in a picket-fenced garden. His ambitions were already forming into something more expansive, more extraordinary. In his teens, he carried a restless energy, blend of charisma and conviction that drew people to him. Even then, though perhaps no one, not even he, could have predicted how far that magnetism would one day carry him. When he met Meri in the late 1980s, it was as though two visions aligned. She was young, spirited, with a fire in her eyes that matched his own determination. And from their earliest conversations, it was clear she understood his longing for a family life beyond the conventional. They spoke of the future as if it were a blank canvas laid out before them, and in 1990, with all the optimism of youth, they married. In those first years together, they carved out a life that was modest but full of purpose, simple dinners, shared plans, whispered late into the night, moments when it felt as though the whole world existed only for the two of them. Yet even in that intimacy, the idea of expansion, of welcoming other wives into their family, was never far from the surface, not as an intrusion but as a shared goal. When Janelle came into their lives a few years later, it was not with the fireworks of romance, but with the calm assurance of a woman who knew her own mind. Reserved where Meri was passionate, pragmatic where Meri was instinctive. Janelle brought a steadiness to Kody's life, a practical sensibility that balanced the household and ensured that dreams were grounded in the reality of bills, schedules, and daily responsibilities. She became wife number two, and the dynamic of the family shifted. Not with tension at first, but with a quiet recalibration of roles and rhythms. Then came Christine, and with her, a new kind of warmth. She was affectionate, openly loving, and carried within her a gift for nurturing a patience that seemed limitless when it came to children, and a joy in the chaos of a growing household. Christine didn't just join the family. She became its heart, the one who kept traditions alive, who filled the kitchen with the smell of home-cooked meals, and who saw to it that family dinners were not hurried affairs, but occasions where everyone gathered, spoke, and laughed. By the time Robyn entered the picture in 2010, the Browns had already woven together a complex web of relationships, responsibilities, and routines. Robyn's arrival was different. Not only was she younger, with a softer voice and a gentle manner that contrasted with the others, but her entry coincided with an opportunity that would change the course of all their lives. That year, TLC came knocking. Not with the promise of scandalous reality television, but with the proposition of a documentary-style series intended to educate, to show the world what polygamy wasn't, what it wasn't. For Kody, it was a golden ticket, a chance to reshape public perception, to present their family not as a secretive, shadowy anomaly, but as a modern, functioning unit filled with love, laughter, and mutual respect. The wives, though cautious, saw the potential too. Despite the risks of exposing their lives to millions of strangers in a world that could be quick to misunderstand or even condemn their choices, when Sister Wives debuted later that year, America watched with fascination. In the first episode, viewers were introduced to a family that did not fit the stereotypes. There was no cold austerity, no oppressive silence on the lively noise of children, the playful teasing between siblings, and the gentle chaos of a large household trying to function as one. Kody, with his long blonde hair and boundless enthusiasm, became the charismatic centerpiece, smiling easily, speaking with warmth and confidence, convincing viewers that he loved each of his wives equally and that his only goal was to keep the family together. Each wife developed her own following. Meri, the original partner, fiercely loyal and unwilling to let go of the ideals they had built their lives around. Janelle, the measured problem solver who kept the machinery of the household running. Christine, the soul of the family who made every child feel seen and loved. And Robyn, the newcomer whose quiet voice belied her growing influence. Publicly, the Browns seemed unshakable, openly acknowledging the challenges of jealousy and competition, but always reaffirming their commitment to working through them. Their motto, "Love should be multiplied, not divided," became a rallying cry among supporters who saw in the Browns a living proof that unconventional families could thrive. Yet behind the laughter and the carefully balanced interviews, the unrelenting demands of plural marriage were beginning to press in. Time and attention, always finite, had to be shared between more and more people, and while the cameras captured the best moments, shared meals, birthday parties, school events, the quieter struggles were already forming. The decision to move from Utah to Las Vegas, framed for the viewers as a protective measure against legal persecution, was in reality also a test of the family's resilience. They bought 4 houses side by side in a neat cul-de-sac, each wife with her own home, yet only steps away from the others. A physical arrangement that was both a comfort and a constant reminder of the complicated web they lived within. Audience, it looked idyllic. For homes, for wives, one big family. But inside those walls, small tensions were beginning to grow. Money was always a factor. Feeding, clothing, and caring for so many children required careful planning, and the emotional work of maintaining balance in such a household was a task without end. Even then, in those early golden years of Sister Wives, as the Browns basked in their newfound visibility and the chance to tell their story on their own terms, the seeds of future discord were quietly taking root. Robyn's integration, though, welcomed at first, subtly altered the flow of Kody's time and affection in ways not yet spoken of openly. And though the family presented themselves as an unbreakable unit, there were moments, brief, almost imperceptible, when a look, a pause, or a silence hinted at the challenges to come. But for now, in the public eye, they remained the Browns, a symbol of togetherness, a portrait of plural marriage for a new era, and the embodiment of one man's belief that love, no matter how unconventional, could be built into something enduring and extraordinary.
He said he tried to lift everybody up to the level. So,
wait, the level of Robyn? Is that what he's saying?
Yeah, the level of communication.
It was in 2015 that the shimmering, carefully maintained image of the Brown family, that smiling, united clan America had grown to know through Sister Wives, first began to fracture in a way that even the most well-rehearsed interviews or cautious public statements could not repair. This was not the sort of tabloid rumor they could brush aside or a minor disagreement smoothed over during filming. It was a seismic rupture, rooted in the private loneliness of Meri Brown's world. Once the singular center of Kody's attention, the only woman to share his name and home before the era of plural marriage truly began. Meri had been the cornerstone upon which the rest of the family was built, She had walked beside Kody before the TV cameras, before the move from state to state, before the complexity of 4 households and 18 children. In those early days, she had been first in his heart and first in his schedule. But time, the expansion of the family, and the inevitable redistribution of emotional energy had worn away at that position. By 2015, she was no longer the unquestioned partner at his side. She was one of 4. And increasingly, she felt like the least visible. The move to Las Vegas had changed the physical arrangement of the family, but had not mended this emotional drift. Even with the 4 homes built neatly into the same cul-de-sac, each just steps from the other, Meri seemed to inhabit a parallel existence. Family gatherings showed her on the fringes, walking alone on the pavement between houses while children dashed across the street in clusters. Or sitting at the edges of parties with a smile that, if you looked closely, stopped short of her eyes. For the casual viewer, these were fleeting moments, easily lost among the bustle of a large family. But to those who had been following the Browns closely, there were glimpses of something unspoken. The quiet erosion of a bond that had once been central to the family's strength. It was in this space of emotional vacancy that Meri stumbled into what she believed to be a connection, one that began innocently enough as a friendship online. Here, in the quiet glow of a computer screen, was someone who seemed to listen without judgment. Who asked about her day, who made her feel interesting and important again. Over weeks and months, this correspondence deepened. The person she thought she knew, Sam, became a source of emotional validation. Someone who seemed to see her not as 1/4 of a marriage, but as an individual worthy of affection and focus. Meri would later insist that it was never about physical intimacy. It was about being recognized, about reclaiming the feeling of being a priority. Yet this illusion, already fragile, collapsed with brutal force when she discovered Sam did not exist. Her confidant, her would-be rescuer from isolation, was the invention of a woman engaged in an elaborate and cruel catfishing scheme. The revelation was shattering, part humiliation, part heartbreak, part the sickening shock of betrayal. But it was not a wound that could heal in private. As the truth emerged, it was woven into the fabric of Sister Wives episodes and plastered across tabloids. Fans and critics alike took to social media and online forums to pick apart the details, debating whether Meri had been emotionally unfaithful or simply desperate for connection. Some offered her sympathy, painting her as a victim of manipulation. Others were less forgiving, suggesting she had crossed an emotional line. Within the family, the fallout was immediate. When Kody addressed it publicly, his words were devoid of the warmth or reassurance one might expect from a husband of over 2 decades. Instead, they were measured, almost bureaucratic. He stated that he no longer felt romantic love for Meri. He would remain loyal to her as part of the family. Yes, but their marriage in his heart was over. That single declaration marked a permanent change in Meri's position. Though still present in the physical geography of the family at dinners, in group photos, in holiday gatherings, she was no longer woven into the emotional fabric of the household. Her role had shifted from partner to peripheral figure. Her influence and intimacy with Kody reduced to a polite shadow of what it once had been. Even as the family navigated the public storm of Meri's scandal, another quieter tension was tightening its grip, one centered around Christine, the 3rd wife. From the beginning, Christine had been the nurturer, the keeper of family traditions, the warm presence who brought the children together with her laughter and her cooking. She loved the bustle, the noise, the small hands tugging at her sleeves, the satisfaction of feeding not just bodies, but spirits around a crowded table. Yet as the years passed, she began to feel increasingly invisible. The arrival of Robyn had unsettled her more than she first allowed herself to admit. She saw the way Kody's eyes softened when he looked at Robyn, the way his laughter with her flowed easily, unforced. At first, Christine told herself it was temporary, the inevitable honeymoon phase that accompanies a new relationship. But as the seasons turned, that early closeness did not fade. If anything, seemed to grow stronger, more exclusive. And Christine began to wonder whether her own contributions were being quietly overlooked. Her rare admissions of jealousy in the show's confessionals hinted at deeper wounds, a simmering resentment that she was being edged out of the center. Underpinning all this was a strain that no one in the family could ignore: money. The Browns. Plural marriage was not just an emotional balancing act, it was a logistical and financial one, maintaining for households each with its own bills, mortgages and maintenance, while raising 18 children with their schooling, clothing, medical care, and countless daily needs was a financial feat few could imagine. The income from sister wives was significant, but it was not limitless. And as the family began to pursue their next big dream, the purchase of Coyote Pass in Flagstaff, Arizona, where they planned to build multiple homes, the stakes rose sharply. The investment tied them all together financially. But Christine and Janelle began to notice what they perceived as disparities. More of Kody's time, energy, and even financial resources seemed to be directed toward Robyn's household. Robyn's home was newer, larger, more comfortably furnished. Her children appeared to benefit from a greater share of his attention. In a plural marriage, equality is more than an ideal. It is the very glue that keeps the system intact. When one wife feels she is receiving less, the others inevitably begin to compare, to measure, to question. Christine and Janelle's observations became points of tension, small at first, but growing. They were no longer isolated feelings, but part of a pattern, and once trust in that balance was shaken, it was difficult to restore. Then, in early 2020, the world shifted. The pandemic swept in, reshaping daily life in ways no one could have foreseen. For many families, lockdowns meant more time together. For the Browns, they meant more time apart. Kody implemented strict rules about contact, travel, and safety measures. On paper, they were to protect everyone equally. In practice, they seemed to favor one household. Kody spent most of his time at Robyn's home, citing her strict compliance with his guidelines. He criticized Christine and Janelle for allowing their older children to work, to visit friends, to live lives that did not conform exactly to his standards. To Christine, the imbalance was undeniable. And then came the moment that turned quiet dissatisfaction into a breaking point. One of her daughters required surgery. And in her eyes, Kody was neither present nor supportive in the way she believed a father and husband should be. It confirmed in the most personal way a fear she had been carrying, that her children were no longer among his priorities. Her disappointment solidified into resolve. She could not remain in a marriage where she and her children were always secondary. Janelle, the family's pragmatic problem solver, had long been the one to keep herself above the emotional fray. She focused on schedules, finances, and keeping life moving forward. But even she had her limits. She had tried to abide by Kody's rules. But she would not cut herself off from her older children, some of whom lived on their own. When Kody confronted her, she did something uncharacteristic. She challenged him directly, in a moment that would become one of the season's most talked about exchanges. Janelle told him bluntly, "You're making it impossible to be married to you." For viewers who had always seen her as his most loyal ally, the moment was a jolt. The image of Kody as the patient, unifying leader was crumbling, and it was not just happening behind closed doors. Public opinion, once a mixed, but largely supportive chorus, began to shift. Social media became a battleground. Hashtags accusing Kody of favoritism trended. Memes mocked the imbalance between his time at Robyn's house and the rest of the family. Longtime viewers who had once admired his ability to keep it all together now saw a man making choices that pushed his other wives to the margins. The cracks that had once been subtle, barely visible to the untrained eye, had widened into deep, undeniable fault lines. Everyone, the wives, the children, the fans, could feel the structure beginning to shake.
Sure, please. Go for it.
it looks like we're like fighting with each other, or felt like it, and then we weren't really. Anyway, it's just funny.
Christine was the first to act, and when she did, was not with explosive confrontation or bitter shouting matches, but with a quiet, deliberate certainty that left no room for doubt. For years, she had carried her disappointments like a hidden weight, moments when she had stood in the same room as her husband and felt invisible, days when her contributions to the family seemed to vanish into the background noise of an overextended marriage. There had been times when she held her tongue, convincing herself that loyalty meant endurance, that things could still be repaired. But the balance had long since tipped from hope to exhaustion, and when the final realization came, it arrived. Not as a storm, but as a calm, unshakable resolve. She began to clear away the remnants of a shared life. Shirts that still carried the faint scent of his cologne. Books with folded corners marking places he might one day return to. The small, everyday items that, when gathered together, were proof of how many years they had tried. One by one, she placed them into boxes. There was no rush, no chaos, just this steady rhythm of someone taking control of her own ending. By the time the last box was sealed, Christine had already stepped away emotionally. The act of moving them to the garage was simply the physical punctuation to a decision long made in her heart. Then, with her children, she left for Utah, the place where her story with Kody had begun decades earlier, but which now represented the chance to build a new life entirely on her own terms. Far from the endless compromise and competition that had become her normal. Her departure was more than the loss of one wife. It was the removal of a key pillar in the fragile architecture of the Browns. Janelle, Christine's closest confidant within the family, had for years played the role of stabilizer, the one who could navigate tensions without escalating them. Who could keep the family's practical affairs running even when emotions ran high, but without Christine beside her, the weight of maintaining that balance shifted unbearably. It wasn't one single incident that broke her patience. It was the accumulation of too many moments when her needs and those of her children were secondary to Kody's focus on Robyn. The pandemic had already stripped away the polite veneers, laying bare the patterns that had been there all along: the uneven enforcement of rules, the selective presence, the emotional absence. As she watched Christine walk away, Janelle began to recognize that the marriage she was in was no longer the one she had once agreed to. The sense of partnership had faded, replaced by a set of expectations that felt increasingly one-sided. Eventually, she too chose separation, not in a sudden, explosive break, but with the same steady clarity that Christine had shown. Stepping out from under the shadow of a relationship that no longer matched the values she lived by. Meri's departure was different, not because it was less significant, but because in many ways it had already happened years earlier. The 2015 catfishing scandal had been the fracture that never truly healed. When Kody himself declared publicly that he no longer had romantic feelings for her, something essential in their marriage had died. For years afterward, Meri had existed in a strange limbo, still at family gatherings, still included in group photos, still living near the others, but without the connection that once made those things meaningful. She stayed out of loyalty to the history they shared, to the children, to the idea of the Browns as a unit. But even the strongest ties fray when they are left untended. When she finally confirmed her split, there was no shock in the announcement. It was not the start of a break, but the official recognition of one that had taken place quietly over a long and lonely stretch of years. And so, one by one, the wives were gone, until only Robyn remained. To Kody, she was the steadfast partner, the one who had stood by his rules, who had defended his decisions even when they brought criticism. With her, he clung to the dream of Coyote Pass, that sprawling parcel of Flagstaff land that had once been the family's great hope. That place where they imagined building homes side by side and living out their days as an interconnected but harmonious whole. Yet, as the years passed, the land remained empty. Its dusty surface broken only by weeds and the wind. No houses had been built, no foundations poured. It existed now as a kind of monument to what had been promised but never realized, a physical embodiment of the gap between intention and reality. The emotional cost of this disintegration reached far beyond the now fractured marriages. The children, who had once been the living, laughing heart of sister wives, found themselves caught between households, between parents who barely spoke outside of necessary arrangements. Some were old enough to speak publicly about their feelings, sharing in interviews or on social media that they felt abandoned or at least deprioritized by their father. The pandemic years had made this worse, with Kody spending the majority of his time in Robyn's household. Visits to the others were infrequent. Holidays, once sprawling events with crowded dining tables, became fractured affairs, each household hosting its own version, sometimes on different days, forcing the children to choose where to spend their time. Birthdays were celebrated in pockets, the sense of one great family replaced by smaller, disconnected gatherings where the absence of certain faces was impossible to ignore. On camera, the change was undeniable. The family interviews, once filled with the easy closeness of shared jokes and overlapping voices, became exercises in careful spacing and guarded language. The wives no longer leaned in towards one another. The gaps between them on the couch seemed to mirror the emotional distance. Where once smiles had been unguarded, now they were polite but strained. Conversations that might once have been interrupted by playful teasing now contained long pauses, as though each person was measuring their words. Viewers saw Christine speak with unwavering certainty about why she had left. Watched Janelle challenge Kody's behavior with a firmness that surprised even her longtime supporters, and heard Meri speak of her isolation with a kind of tired dignity. And then there was Kody himself, still articulate, still capable of commanding attention, but with a sharper edge to his tone. An impatience that hinted at defensiveness rather than leadership. Robyn's tears became a recurring feature. She insisted that she had never wanted to be the only wife, that she missed the large family gatherings, the bustle, the sisterhood. But to Christine and Janelle, these words rang hollow. In their view, Robyn had always been the central recipient of Kody's time, attention, and resources. Her position now as the sole remaining wife seemed less like a tragedy and more like the natural conclusion of a pattern that had long been visible to those living within it. The Browns had once entered reality television as a statement, a living, breathing argument that plural marriage could be about equality, respect, and a shared vision for the future. They had stood shoulder to shoulder, looking into the camera and telling the world, "We are stronger together." For a while, it had seemed believable. For a while, it had even been true. But in the end, the very elements that had once been, their strengths, their numbers, their shared narrative, their public visibility, became the same forces that tore them apart. When the dust settled, what remained was not the sprawling, interconnected family they had promised viewers, but a man and a woman standing alone on an empty stretch of land, facing a horizon that no longer held the same promise. And so the Browns saga, which began with a vision of love multiplied, concludes as a cautionary tale. It stands as a reminder that no matter how noble the intention, without fairness, without balance, and without a commitment to equality, even the most seemingly solid structures will crumble from within. If you've been captivated by the rise and fall of the Brown family, make sure to subscribe to Starspill USA, where we dig deeper into the stories behind the headlines, uncovering the truths, the turning points, and the human moments that keep you watching until the very last word.